The House will now have under consideration House Bill 20. Gentleman from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent that we do not read House Bill 20.
Without objection, the gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The territory legislature created the University of Idaho in 1889 and provided that Idaho citizens would receive a free education, just as they did in public schools. The next year, Idaho adopted its constitution and also adopted past actions of the territorial legislature as part of that new constitution. As a result, for the next 120 years, the University of Idaho was prohibited from charging tuition, although it was allowed to charge student fees. Primary difference between fees and tuition is you cannot use tuition to support the cost of classroom education. In 2005, the legislature granted all of the state's public colleges and universities, except the University of Idaho, the right to charge tuition to undergraduate residents of Idaho. This past November, Idaho voters overwhelmingly approved passage of H.J.R. 101, a constitutional amendment to remove the University of Idaho's tuition prohibition from the Constitution. House Bill 20 brings the Idaho Code into alignment with the Constitution by removing statutory language prohibiting the University of Idaho from charging tuition to undergraduate students of Idaho. It repeals Section 333717, which provides that the University of Idaho can charge student fees but not tuition, and amends Section 333717A to provide that all state colleges and universities can charge fees and tuition prescribed by the State Board of Education. Legislation also includes an emergency clause so that this authority can be used as the State Board of Education sets levels of fees and tuition later this spring. This basically sets a level playing field for all of our institutes of higher education in the state in regard to tuition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. I know the result today will be 63-1. If former gentleman from District 18, who is no longer with us, was here today, it would be 62-2. I did not support this constitutional amendment that leads to the legislation we have today. And I think we are moving in the wrong direction in Idaho. I think rather than making college more expensive for our students, college should be less expensive for our students and potential students. I think the constitutional amendment was a mistake. I think this legislation is a mistake. While I was in Salt Lake City last week, I had an opportunity to watch on television the State of the State address by the governor of Utah. Utah has decided that by 2020, 66% of its residents need to be college graduates. What concerns me is that I think we do these things, this kind of legislation, to fill a temporary budget situation, but we don't have a long-term plan. And to the extent that we have plans, those plans aren't going to get us to where we need to be to compete with one of our neighboring states. We need to find a way to get more of our high school graduates into college and keep them there. When I went to college, the levels of debt that you see today were unheard of for college educations, for a four-year baccalaureate degree. We now saddle our kids who are graduating from our universities with greater and greater debt. And I would suggest to you that this debt does not inure to the benefit of the state of Idaho. This debt largely inures to large financial institutions on the east and west coasts of the United States. We're not doing ourselves any favor here by putting these kids into debt. And secondly, or finally, I would say that we know that the disinvestment in higher education in Idaho began when times were good in this state and we were running budget surpluses. So this is not an issue that we need to have that we need to have tuition at the University of Idaho to deal with a temporary budget problem. We have an issue about the commitment of the state of Idaho to higher education. Higher education is what will be required of our young people in the future if they are to have the jobs with which they can support their families, with which they can afford to stay in Idaho. Just a personal comment regarding my own situation. I am the product of public schools and public education. My wife is the product of public schools and public education. It is my belief that if I had graduated from college with the degree of debt that most kids face today, I may not have been able to stay in this state. I may have said I'll have to go somewhere else and make enough money in order to repay that debt. I don't think we want to go back to the years when one of Idaho's greatest exports was its children. I'd like to have as many of my children and as many of my grandchildren here in the state of Idaho with me as is possible. I suspect that many Idahoans feel the same. So I think that instead of passing this bill, we ought to be ensuring that there is no tuition at the other institutions, other public institutions of higher education in the state of Idaho. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Lady from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to debate in favor of this bill. I certainly commend the intent of the comments that we just heard from the gentleman from 18 with respect to the debt load for our students who attend our universities. On the other hand, there's no evidence given that other universities have been able to charge tuition prior to this that has caused their rates to be more. It simply gives the University of Idaho the flexibility to spend those monies in the ways that they most need to, and that's really important for them, and that's why we changed the terminology for the other universities as well. So I think we should always keep our attention on the cost of university education and try to hold it down as much as we can. And I think that's the goal of all of us, but I think that isn't the main point we're dealing with here, so I'd ask for your support on the bill.
Is there further debate? Lady from 35.
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker. My minions here have to get me set up to speak, and I do appreciate that, gentleman. Anyway, having heard the debate by the gentleman who was very good with common sense, and since I did not support the constitutional amendment, I have no obligation to vote for this legislation, and I do agree with the debate that was given at the first debate. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, would the gentleman from 6 care to close?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the good lady from 6 summarized the major points. I think we have to remember that this legislation has flowed from the unanimous, overwhelming approved passage of a constitutional amendment, HJR 101. It does level the playing field for all of the institutions in the state of Idaho, and I would urge a green light on this. Thank you.
Debate is closed. Question is, shall House Bill 20 pass? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their vote. Has every member voted?
Smith, 24.
Does any member wish to change their vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. Roll call shows 60 aye, 5 nay, 5 absent and excused, a majority having voted in the affirmative. House Bill 20 has passed the House. Is there correction to title? Hearing none, the title is approved and the bill will be transmitted to the Senate.